What if I told you every major safety rule in Formula One is written in the aftermath of a crash no one was meant to survive? For decades, every fatal mistake, every broken car, every life lost left behind a clue, a warning that reshaped the sport piece by piece. And 27 seconds. That's all it took. This is the story of the moments no one ever forgets. Come with me. 2022 British Grand Prix. Zhou Guanyu's Alfa Romeo launches into the fence at nearly 300 km per hour. The car flips, skids upside down, sparks everywhere. Then silence. George Russell sprints from his own crashed car toward the wreckage. No one can see Zhou. No one knows if he's alive. Then the news comes, he is conscious, completely unharmed. And the reason? Halo. Without that titanium ring above his cockpit, Zhou's head would have taken the full force of both impacts. But Formula One wasn't always like this. It took tragedy after tragedy to get here. And the first one happened in Formula 2. Henry Surtees was just 18 years old. The son of 1964 Formula One champion John Surtees. Racing at Brands Hatch on July 19, 2009, where legends once battled. But that summer day, everything changed. Jack Clark spun out. His car slammed into the barriers, routine stuff for a Formula 2 race. But what happened next was anything but routine. A loose wheel, flying at over 225 km per hour, bounced across the track. It hit Henry Surtees square on the helmet. He was unconscious instantly. By the time marshals reached him, it was already too late. He was airlifted to the Royal London Hospital. Hours later, Motorsport lost one of its brightest young stars. But this wasn't just a tragedy but a wake-up call. Henry's death exposed a brutal truth: drivers' heads were still dangerously vulnerable. His father, John Surtees, became the leading voice for change. He created the Henry Surtees Foundation to improve safety and support drivers with brain injuries. And by 2011, Formula One had doubled the number of wheel tethers. But behind the scenes, engineers were already working on something even more crucial: head protection systems. And just as progress was being made, something terrible happened. 2014, Japan. The Suzuka Grand Prix, held under the shadow of a typhoon. On lap 42, everything began to unravel. Adrian Sutil spun out at the Dunlop corner and crashed into the barriers. The incident seemed insignificant. But no tow truck came. No safety car. No red flag. And one lap later, the worst happened. Jules Bianchi lost control at the exact same corner. The Marussia disappeared under the crane. Marshals scrambled. This wasn't a typical crash. He was unconscious by the time they pulled him out. The impact, 254 GS. The kind of number no human body is built to survive. The helmet had done all it could, but it wasn't enough. He was rushed to Mia Prefectural Hospital. Brain trauma. Emergency surgery. A medically induced coma. And then, 9 months later, the news no one wanted to hear: Jules Bianchi had passed away. The first driver to die from a race incident in Formula One since Ayrton Senna in 1994. The crash shattered the paddock. No champagne was popped. No celebration. Just shock and regret, because it was avoidable. Why was a crane on a live track? Why wasn't the safety car deployed? The accidents of Henry and Jules gave impetus to change. It couldn't happen again. Bianchi's death was the last push Formula One needed, and it led to the biggest safety innovation in modern racing. Halo. Strangely, at first, all the drivers were negative about the changes. Max Verstappen was outspoken against it. But everything changed in 2020 during the Bahrain Grand Prix. Romain Grosjean made a sharp move across the track, directly into Daniel Kvyat. His car split in half. For 27 seconds, there was no word. No movement. We watched in horror. Was this it? And then, out of the flames, he emerged. Every piece of safety innovation from the past 2 decades did its job. The survival cell remained intact. the halo shoved the metal barrier up over his head. Grosjean's crash proved one thing beyond doubt: the halo could save a driver even when engulfed in flames. Grosjean would never race in Formula One again, but he left with something far greater: his life. And Jules' accident affected not only F1. It also deeply impacted his godson, Charles Leclerc, who in 2019 had a chance to win at the Belgian Grand Prix and dedicated to him. But as soon as Charles won pole position, something unexpected happened. Trident's Giuliano Alesi lost control through the flat-out corner. He spun, smashed into the barrier, and bounced back onto the track. Anthoine Hubert veered to avoid the wreckage. But in that split-second moment, he struck debris and hit the barriers at nearly 220 km/h. But what came next was worse. Juan Manuel Correa, unsighted and at full speed, collided directly with Hubert's side pod. The impact was measured at over 81 gs. Hubert was rushed to the medical center, but his injuries were beyond recovery. At 6:35 p.m. local time, the FIA announced the unthinkable. The motorsport world was in mourning. But among the grief stood one man, his face set like stone. Charles Leclerc, Hubert's childhood friend, his teammate in karting. Charles was the only one left to chase that dream. As the lights went out in Spa, and when the checkered flag waved, Leclerc had won. More than that, he had carried his best friend to the top with him. But as the paddock mourned one young life lost, it couldn't ignore the echoes of another dark chapter. Because motorsport had seen weekends like this before. And in 1994, it saw its darkest. The race weekend in San Marino began like any other. Ayrton Senna was the favorite of the season, but heading into Imola, he was already trailing the rising star Michael Schumacher. Friday brought the first warning. Rubens Barrichello crashed heavily. For a moment, it looked fatal. Luckily, Rubens survived with only fractures and a concussion. But no sooner had he recovered from the first accident than another happened. Saturday, qualifying. Roland Ratzenberger, in just his second Grand Prix weekend, was fighting for a spot on the grid. Moments earlier, he had run wide and damaged his front wing. Then, at over 300 km/h, it failed. It was the first death in Formula One in 12 years. No one in the paddock could believe it. But it hit Senna the hardest. He had seen everything, but even he didn't know that the worst was yet to come. Sunday. Race day. When the lights went out, it happened again, another crash. Safety car. Senna continued to lead, but it was not the same. Cold tires. Low ground clearance. A car he didn't trust. Lap 7. At 233 km/h, the Williams car crashed into a concrete wall. At first, it seemed there was hope. He moved. But when the medics got to him, it became clear the situation was critical. At the moment of impact, the front right wheel came off along with part of the suspension and pierced the helmet visor. The force of the collision threw his head to the other side, causing serious skull fractures. Senna was pronounced dead at the hospital. And what happened next was not silence. It was change. The FIA sprang into action. In the months that followed, cockpits were redesigned. Tracks were reprofiled. Medical protocols were overhauled. Helmets were reinforced. And eventually, the hand system was introduced. The lessons learned from Senna would mean everything for Felipe Massa. 2009, Hungary. Qualifying. Massa was pushing hard. Then suddenly, without warning, something struck him. Even after the crash, his engine was still revving. He wasn't moving. The slow-motion replay revealed the shocking cause: a tiny spring had flown off Rubens Barrichello's car just seconds earlier. It bounced down the track, and at over 260 km/h, it struck Massa directly on the helmet. Massa was airlifted to a hospital in critical condition. Skull fractures. Concussion. He was unconscious, bleeding, and doctors feared the worst. He survived, but he missed the rest of the 2009 season. And though he came back to racing in 2010, many believe Felipe Massa was never quite the same again. But this crash changed more than just his career. The spring that struck Massa exposed a deadly flaw, the visor gap in Formula One helmets. It was the same vulnerability that cost Ayrton Senna his life 15 years earlier. After Senna's death, the FIA began redesigning helmets to withstand debris impact. And on that day in Budapest, that progress paid off. Safety caught up just in time for some. But there was a time when it couldn't. And one driver raced like it never would. These crashes, Zhou, Henry, Jules, Grosjean, Anthoine, Senna, Massa. They're the reason drivers today can walk away from crashes that would have been fatal decades ago. Every piece of safety equipment, every regulation, every redesign, they all have a story. They all have a name behind them. And they all came at a cost. The halo, the hands device, the improved helmets, the survival cells, the barrier designs. They're all here because someone paid the ultimate price. And that's the truth about Formula One safety. It's written in blood, sweat, and tears. And every driver who steps into that cockpit today owes their life to the ones who came before.